The forest was silent that night, a silence so deep it seemed the stars themselves were holding their breath. A cold mist rolled between the ancient trees, wrapping everything in a ghostly haze. At the far edge of humanity's frontier, where outposts clung to the wilderness like fragile sparks in the darkness, a young human moved through the shadows with quiet steps. His boots crunched on the damp soil as he checked the traps he had set, steel devices meant to catch the predator that had been hunting the colony's livestock. His pulse was steady, but his senses were sharp. In this part of the galaxy, the night belonged to creatures that saw humans as prey. Humanity had learned to fight back, to build walls and weapons, but out here, alone in the trees, all those defenses felt far away. He tightened his grip on the rifle slung over his shoulder. Then he heard it, the snap of a trap closing. His muscles tensed. He ran toward the sound. Branches whipped against his arms. Leaves broke under his boots. He expected claws, teeth, the red eyes of the predator. But when he reached the clearing, the world tilted. Tangled in the steel net, struggling weakly against its grip, was not a beast. It was a girl. Not human. Her skin shimmered faintly with a soft silver-blue glow under the moonlight, her hair like strands of white fire, her eyes wide with terror. She gasped in her language, foreign and broken, her small body shaking as if she already knew what would happen next. She thought he had caught her on purpose. She thought he was the monster. And for one strange moment, as their eyes locked, the mist between the trees felt heavier. He could hear her heart racing. She believed he was going to devour her. He slowly knelt down, lifting his hands to show he wasn't going to hurt her, but the alien girl flinched like a cornered animal. He could see the way the net had cut into her wrists, thin trails of glowing blood slipping down her arms. Her kind had been seen before on the far edges of human space, but never this close. Whispers in the colonies spoke of them as ghosts of the old war, beings who saw humans as monsters in the dark. She whimpered something that sounded like a prayer. He felt something shift inside his chest. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of quiet ache. Still, the danger wasn't gone. The forest was alive with hidden eyes, and the predator was real. A low growl slid through the air like a blade across glass. The trap wasn't the only thing that had snapped tonight. He turned slowly, rifle in hand, as two red points of light blinked between the trees. The real enemy was coming. She screamed when the growl grew closer, twisting in the net like a terrified creature. He could run. Leave her. Save himself. But her fear burned into him like a brand, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he cut the net instead. The moment she was free, the night exploded into movement. The creature burst from the shadows, massive, black-furred, its claws dragging lines through the earth. It roared, a sound that made even the stars seem smaller. The girl fell backward with a cry, crawling away from both of them. He lifted his rifle and fired. The crack of plasma ripped through the fog. The beast staggered but didn't stop. The forest shook as it lunged toward them. He grabbed the alien girl's hand, so small, so cold, and pulled her to her feet. They ran through the forest, branches tearing at their skin, breath burning in their lungs. Behind them, the monster howled and gave chase. Humanity had built weapons to conquer stars, but here in the mud and darkness, survival was still primal. A trapper and an alien girl against the unknown. They stumbled through a ravine, the air thick with their panting breaths. She didn't trust him, not yet. Her eyes still held the fear of someone expecting to die. But she didn't let go of his hand either. The chase ended in a clearing where the trapper turned to fight. He set his rifle, his jaw hard, the ground beneath his boots cold and wet. The alien girl cowered behind him, clutching her injured wrist, watching the human she had feared stand between her and death. The beast lunged. Plasma flashed like lightning. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burnt fur. The creature fell, its body twisting in the mud, the forest silent once more. He collapsed to his knees, breathless, exhausted, but alive. She stared at him, silver-blue skin gleaming faintly in the firelight of the broken rifle barrel. This was not the story she had been told. This was not the human she had imagined. Slowly, like a wounded bird, she crawled closer. He met her gaze, his own chest rising and falling in the cold night air. She expected him to claim her. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out water. She hesitated. Then, trembling, she took it. The hours that followed were quiet, filled with the crackle of a small fire and the slow sound of two different hearts learning to beat in the same space. She sat wrapped in his worn jacket, knees pulled to her chest. He cleaned the cuts on her wrists, his hands steady, careful not to startle her. In her language, she whispered the stories she had grown up with, about how humans were cold creatures who took what they wanted, about how they devoured the weak. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. He tried to speak slowly, using gestures, showing her food, fire, and the stars. Her world had told her humans were monsters. But here, by the fire, she found something else. He had no plan to hurt her. His only plan was survival, and somehow, hers had become part of that. As the night stretched on, the forest turned quiet, and her breathing slowed. She watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, as if waiting for the trap to close. But it never did. He leaned against a fallen tree, watching the horizon, while she slowly leaned closer to the warmth of the fire and the warmth of someone she had once feared. Far beyond the trees, above the atmosphere, two great civilizations were still at odds. Humanity and her kind had been enemies for generations. Up there, warships drifted like silent wolves among the stars, waiting for the next spark. But down here, in the mud and mist, one small human and one frightened alien girl had found something else. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was real. When the sun rose, the alien girl could have fled. She could have disappeared back into the forest, carrying her fear with her forever. But she didn't. She sat beside him, her silver-blue skin glowing softly in the new light. He glanced at her, not sure what to say, not sure what would happen next. She reached out slowly, uncertain but brave, and touched his hand. A small gesture, but in that quiet moment, it felt like something more powerful than any fleet. The galaxy was filled with fear, with war, with voices that wanted to divide. But this was different. She had thought he'd devour her. Instead, he had protected her. She had been his accidental captive. Now, she was something else entirely. The forest exhaled around them as if it understood. Two enemies sat in silence, no longer enemies. Just two beings trying to understand one another. She screamed when he took one step closer, the sound cutting through the night like a blade of ice. Her body shook violently, as if the forest itself was pressing down on her. The silver-blue glow of her skin shimmered under the pale moonlight, every trembling breath showing how terrified she truly was. Her wide, glassy eyes followed his hands, expecting violence, expecting the stories she had grown up hearing to come true. She pressed herself deeper into the net, as if the steel wires could shield her from what she thought was coming. He froze, realizing how she saw him. Not as a man, not as someone trying to help, but as a monster. His heart pounded as he slowly raised both hands to show he wasn't going to hurt her, whispering softly even though she couldn't understand his language. His voice cracked the way it does when someone talks to a cornered creature, quiet and careful, as if any wrong movement could set off an explosion. Her breathing quickened. She tried to crawl away, but the metal net held her tight, digging into her wrists and legs. Thin streams of glowing blood traced down her arms, reflecting faint light in the mist. Her people's blood looked almost like liquid starlight, bright against the dark ground. It made the whole scene feel unreal, like something not meant to happen. He slowly crouched down, careful not to startle her. The forest wind whistled softly through the trees, carrying the faint hum of distant alien insects. He could hear every sound, her labored breathing, the soft drip of her blood on the wet soil, the distant creak of shifting branches. Somewhere beyond the tree line, something else moved. It was faint now, like a whisper beneath the mist, but he felt it in his gut. The real predator wasn't far. The trap had gone off, the forest had gone quiet, and silence in a place like this was never a good sign. But she didn't understand that. All she saw was a human standing over her. In her world, humans were the ones to fear. She had grown up with stories of fire raining from human ships, of colonies burned down to ash, of her people dragged away and never seen again. She believed those stories. She believed he would devour her. That fear was written all over her shaking body. His mind raced. If he left her in the net, the predator would come. If he tried to help, she might fight him, scream, make it worse. The choice weighed heavy, but it wasn't really a choice. He couldn't leave her. Even if she hated him, even if she thought he was the monster in the dark, he couldn't just walk away. He stepped closer again, slowly, his hands still raised, his rifle strapped to his back so she could see he wasn't going to shoot. She flinched with every move. Her lips moved rapidly in her language, whispering something over and over, a desperate rhythm that sounded like prayer. The net creaked as she struggled, her thin fingers clawing at the steel. He knelt down, lowering himself to her level, making himself small so he wouldn't tower over her. She stared at him with eyes full of terror and stubborn fire. Even afraid, she wasn't weak. She was fighting with everything she had. He gently touched the edge of the net, and she screamed again. It wasn't just fear now. It was pure instinct, raw and desperate. She thought the touch was the beginning of her end. But he didn't hurt her. He carefully began loosening the net from where it had wrapped around her ankle. She froze, confused. This wasn't how the stories went. Humans didn't help. They didn't kneel in the mud. They didn't touch gently. She looked down at his hands, covered in dirt and scratches, moving slowly like someone handling something fragile. He spoke again in a calm, steady tone. She couldn't understand the words, but his voice wasn't cold. It was warm, almost soft, cutting through the fear that had wrapped itself around her. But then the sound came again. Low, heavy, closer. A growl rolled through the forest like thunder under the ground. The birds scattered from the trees in silence. She jerked her head toward the sound, her eyes going wide, terror turning sharp and real. The predator was moving. He turned his head sharply, his muscles tightening as he scanned the mist. Two red glimmers appeared in the darkness between the trees, like the eyes of something too big to belong to this world. The alien girl whimpered, pressing herself against the net, no longer looking at him but at what was coming. The air felt heavy, thick, almost alive. He could taste the danger like metal on his tongue. Her breathing grew frantic, and for the first time, she looked at him not as a monster but as something else, because she understood what was coming. That thing wasn't here for him. It was here for her. It had been hunting her. The net wasn't her only prison. The forest itself had been a trap. He felt his pulse quicken. He could leave now, vanish into the trees, let the predator finish what it started. No one would ever know. But he couldn't. He reached into his belt, pulled the knife from its sheath, and met her panicked stare. She didn't know what he was about to do. She flinched again as the blade touched the metal. One swift pull and the first strand snapped. She gasped. Another snap. And another. Her heart was hammering so hard he could almost hear it. Her fear didn't vanish, but it shifted. She didn't trust him. But she was no longer only afraid of him. The growl grew louder, closer, shaking through the mist. He cut faster, the steel wires falling away one by one. The predator's outline started to appear in the fog, a massive, black-furred shape crawling forward on four thick limbs, its breath steaming in the cold. She was free enough to crawl, but she didn't move. She was paralyzed between two fears, him and the thing in the forest. Then the last strand snapped. She stumbled to her feet, clutching her injured wrist, backing away slowly. He didn't grab her. He didn't chain her. He only turned toward the trees, raising his rifle with a grim look on his face. Her eyes widened at that, because it wasn't her he was pointing it at. It was the thing behind her. For a heartbeat, the world was silent again. Two enemies stood side by side, united by the threat crawling through the mist. And in that silent heartbeat, the story she had been told all her life began to crack. Humans were supposed to be monsters. But tonight, the monster had red eyes, claws, and the forest behind it. And the human was standing between her and death. The growl came again, deeper this time, rolling through the forest like thunder trapped under the earth. The mist shifted as something massive moved between the trees, its breathing heavy, like a storm swallowing the night. The alien girl froze where she stood, her chest heaving as she stared into the darkness. Her silver-blue skin reflected the faint starlight, glowing softly, making her look like a fragile light against an ocean of shadows. The human trapper's grip tightened around his rifle, his heart hammering but his hands steady. He had spent years surviving on the edge of human space, learning that hesitation often meant death. But this was different. He wasn't alone this time. Beside him stood someone who didn't trust him, someone who still believed he might turn on her at any second. And yet, between them and the approaching beast, there was no one else. The creature's eyes appeared first, two burning red orbs cutting through the mist. They didn't blink. They just stared, fixed on its prey. Its hulking shape followed, black fur blending with the darkness, for powerful limbs pressing into the wet ground. Drool dripped from its jagged teeth, glowing faintly under the moonlight like a sickly reflection of the girl's silver blood. It had been hunting her long before the trap had snapped. That much was clear. Now it wanted to finish what it had started. The alien girl whimpered softly, backing up until her heel struck a rock, her injured wrist clutching her chest. She wanted to run, but the forest behind her was endless, and the predator was faster than either of them. The human could see it in her trembling shoulders. She thought this was the end. He slowly stepped in front of her, raising his rifle toward the glowing red eyes. The movement made her flinch. For a second, she thought he was turning on her. But then she saw his stance, the way his shoulders squared, the way he placed his boots into the mud to anchor himself. He wasn't aiming at her. He was aiming at the monster. Her breath caught. She didn't understand why a human would protect her. In her mind, humans didn't protect, they conquered. They burned. But here he was, placing himself between her and death. The predator let out a guttural snarl, lowering its head. Its long, black claws scraped against the wet earth. It was ready to pounce. The forest held its breath. The human aimed carefully, the barrel of his rifle glowing faint blue with a soft hum. When the creature lunged, he fired. The blast split the silence with a deafening crack. The plasma bolt slammed into the beast's shoulder, spraying sparks and steam. It howled, its roar shaking the trees. But it didn't fall. It just got angrier. The girl covered her ears and screamed, stumbling backward as the monster charged again, this time faster. The human cursed under his breath and fired again, another flash of blue cutting through the mist. This time, the shot burned through the creature's chest, but the beast barely slowed. It was big, too big, its hide thick and scarred from years of hunting. The ground trembled as it closed the distance. He felt the cold bite of fear clawing at the edges of his mind, but he didn't step back. He shifted his aim and yelled at her. Short, sharp sounds she couldn't understand but felt. Run. Now. She didn't move. Fear pinned her like a stone. The beast's roar shook the night as it leapt toward them, claws outstretched, jaws wide. He didn't have time to think. He lunged sideways, grabbed her by the wrist, and dragged her into the trees just as the creature slammed into the ground where they had been standing. Branches tore at their skin as they stumbled through the forest, her light footsteps barely keeping up with his long strides. Her injured wrist burned as he pulled her forward, but she didn't let go. She could hear the beast behind them, crashing through the underbrush like an avalanche. Its roars echoed through the mist, growing louder with each step. The human's breath came fast, his boots sinking into the mud, the forest spinning around them like a blur of shadows. He didn't know how far they could run, only that stopping wasn't an option. She stumbled, nearly falling, and he caught her with one arm, pulling her close without breaking stride. The warmth of his grip shocked her. She had expected cold hands, cruel hands. But his touch was strong and steady, keeping her upright. The beast's growls were close enough now that she could feel them vibrating in her chest. Panic rose inside her like a scream she couldn't release. She didn't know his language, but she didn't need to understand the words to know they were running for their lives. The forest opened up slightly ahead, a narrow ravine cutting through the ground like a dark wound. He glanced at it, then at her, then made a split-second choice. Without warning, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, and jumped. She gasped, clinging to his jacket, her heart slamming against her ribs as they hit the ground hard but rolled through it. The fall bought them seconds. Maybe less. But sometimes, seconds were the difference between life and death. He landed on his knees, panting, his body covered in mud. She coughed, pressing a trembling hand to his chest, her silver blue eyes wide with shock. She had never been this close to a human before. She could smell the sweat and dirt, the faint scent of burned plasma on his clothes. She could hear the pounding of his heart, fast but steady, like a war drum refusing to break. She saw the cut on his cheek, the dirt on his face, the determination in his eyes. For the first time, she realized, he was afraid too. But unlike her, he didn't freeze. He fought. The beast roared above the ravine, its red eyes flashing in the fog. It circled, searching for a way down. Its claws raked the rocks, sending pebbles tumbling. He used the moment to reload, hands moving with the speed of someone who had done this too many times before. She watched in silence, her breath shaking. He could have left her in the net to die. He could have run. But he hadn't. He had chosen to stay. Chosen to fight. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something unfamiliar. The ground shook as the beast leapt down into the ravine. He didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired again. The plasma bolt exploded against the creature's jaw, snapping its head back. It roared, furious, and charged. He pushed her behind a fallen log and stood his ground. The forest erupted into chaos, gunfire, snarling, the crack of bones against earth. The air smelled like burning fur and metal. She covered her mouth to muffle her sobs, watching the human stand alone against the nightmare she had feared for weeks. When the final shot hit the creature square in the chest, it stumbled, fell, and didn't get back up. The forest fell silent again, but this time it was different. The mist hung heavy, the air still, like the world was waiting to see what would happen next. He stood there, chest rising and falling, mud on his boots, blood on his hands, and smoke rising from his rifle barrel. She stared at him, her heart pounding. This was the human she was supposed to fear. This was the monster she had grown up hating. But tonight, he had fought the darkness. He hadn't devoured her. He had saved her. He turned toward her, not with the cold eyes of a conqueror but with a quiet, exhausted look that said everything. No words were needed. In that moment, something cracked inside her, something built from years of fear and lies. She didn't trust him yet. But for the first time, she didn't want to run. The night around them was heavy and still, the mist curling low against the ground like it was listening to their every breath. The beast's body lay twisted near the ravine wall, black fur wet and smoking from the plasma burns. Steam rose in thin ribbons, carrying the smell of scorched flesh into the cold air. The forest, which moments ago had been full of roaring chaos, had gone silent once again. The alien girl pressed her back against the fallen log, her small body trembling as she stared at the human. Her mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened. She had been caught in a human trap, certain she was going to die, certain he was the monster from her people's stories. But then, when the real monster came, he had stood in front of it. Not behind her. Not watching. Not running. He had fought. He had chosen to stand between her and something that could have killed them both. The human trapper lowered his weapon slowly, the soft hum of the plasma rifle fading into silence. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, sweat dripping down the side of his face, cutting through the dirt and blood. His knuckles were scraped, his clothes torn in places where the creature's claws had grazed him. But his eyes weren't on the corpse. They were on her. She was still shaking, her hands clutching her injured wrist like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked small and fragile against the misty forest, glowing faintly with her silver blue skin. For a second, he almost expected her to scream again or run into the darkness. But she didn't. She stayed where she was, her wide eyes locked on him with something different than pure fear. Confusion. He crouched slowly, careful not to startle her, and set the rifle down beside him. The gesture was deliberate. He wanted her to see he wasn't a threat. She flinched when he moved, but didn't pull away. He extended his hand toward her, palm open, fingers relaxed. She stared at it like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. This was not how her people's stories went. Humans were supposed to destroy, not offer. Her lips trembled as she whispered something in her language, soft and uncertain. He didn't understand the words, but the sound carried the weight of a frightened creature trying to protect itself. His hand remained steady. After what felt like forever, she moved a little closer, not walking but crawling carefully across the damp ground. Her silver hair fell over her face as she reached out, shaking, and touched his hand with the tips of her fingers. It was the lightest contact, almost like she expected it to burn. But it didn't. It was warm, rough, and human. Her breath caught. For the first time, she looked at him without seeing a monster. She saw a person. The forest was still dangerous. The growls of distant creatures echoed somewhere far away. He knew they couldn't stay here. He pointed toward the trees, then toward himself, then to her, trying to show her they had to move. She hesitated, but then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she nodded. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. He grabbed his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and offered her his hand again. She hesitated longer this time, then finally slid her trembling fingers into his palm. He pulled her gently to her feet, careful not to cause her pain. They walked through the forest in silence, their steps soft and careful. The mist hung low, clinging to their ankles. Every sound was sharp, the crunch of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the faint whistling of wind through broken branches. She limped slightly from the cuts the trap had left on her legs. He slowed his pace without saying a word, adjusting his stride to match hers. She noticed. It confused her. She had expected cruelty. Instead, he gave her space to keep up. When they reached a small clearing surrounded by thick roots and fallen trees, he stopped. This was his safe place, a hidden camp he had built months ago. A low stone circle held the remains of an old fire, and a small canvas shelter leaned against the tree trunk. She froze at the edge of the clearing, her glowing eyes scanning everything, her breathing shallow. To her, this was enemy ground. But when he set his rifle down by the fire pit and crouched to light it, she didn't see a soldier preparing to capture her. She saw someone exhausted, someone who just wanted warmth. The fire cracked softly as it grew, golden light pushing back the cold mist. She stepped closer, drawn to the warmth even though her mind still screamed to run. He handed her a piece of cloth to clean her wounds. She stared at it like it was a trick. But when he didn't move or demand anything, she slowly took it. The cloth was rough against her soft skin, but the warmth from the fire made the pain bearable. He poured water from his flask into his hands and offered it to her. She hesitated again, staring at the liquid as if it were poison. Then, slowly, she brought it to her lips and drank. Something shifted between them in that quiet moment. She had thought he would tear her apart, but he was giving her water, warmth, safety. She had thought she was his prey, but he treated her like a person. The flames flickered against their faces, and for the first time, she didn't look away when their eyes met. There was still fear there, yes, but beneath it, something else was starting to form. Something fragile. He sat a little away from her, not too close, giving her space to breathe. He watched her wrap herself in his old jacket, the fabric too big for her small frame. She pressed it tightly around her shoulders, shivering less now. She didn't speak his language, and he didn't speak hers, but they didn't need to talk. The fire was enough. Their silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer. The kind of silence that said, "We survived." She reached out slowly, pointing at the stars above them through a gap in the trees. She spoke a few soft words, naming constellations he didn't understand. But her voice was calm, not shaking. He followed her finger, looked at the stars, and pointed at his own sky. Different constellations. Different stories. But the same sky. For the first time since she'd fallen into his trap, she didn't see him as just a human. She saw him as another soul under the same stars. The night was still long, danger still lurking in the dark, but something powerful had begun in the firelight. She didn't fully trust him, and he didn't know her, but the first thread of connection had been woven between them. Neither of them said a word, but both of them felt it. The forest no longer felt quite as cold. The fire burned low in the clearing, its faint orange glow dancing across the damp earth like slow-moving embers drifting through a dream. The alien girl sat wrapped in his jacket, her legs pulled tight to her chest, the torn edges of her clothing fluttering in the wind. The human sat a few feet away, crouched near the fire, carefully cleaning his rifle. He wasn't talking, and neither was she. But the silence wasn't as sharp as before. It no longer carried the heavy weight of fear, only the strange, fragile quiet of two strangers caught in the same storm. He could hear the forest breathing around them, the creak of ancient trees, the soft drip of water from the leaves, the distant cry of creatures that stalked the night. But inside this small circle of firelight, there was something different. The danger was still out there, but in this space, the world felt still. The alien girl's glowing silver-blue eyes followed his movements carefully. Every small thing he did mattered to her, because her entire life had taught her to expect the worst from humans. She had grown up hearing stories whispered around him, fires on her world. Stories of ships burning through the sky, of human soldiers tearing through villages like a storm, of her people being taken and never returning. She had believed those stories because they were the only truth she had ever known. She had believed humans were monsters wrapped in skin, capable of anything cruel. And yet now, as she sat in his oversized jacket, the warmth of the fire pressing gently against her face, she saw none of that. He had not hurt her. He had saved her. That was not supposed to happen. He noticed her watching him but didn't turn it into a threat. He kept his movements slow, steady, almost calm. His hands worked on the rifle with practiced ease, but he wasn't building a wall between them. He was simply keeping himself ready. Out here, that was how you stayed alive. When the weapon was set aside, he picked up his canteen and took a slow sip before offering it across the fire to her. She froze again. She always froze when he reached toward her. But this time, it didn't last as long. Her trembling fingers reached out, touched the metal, then took it fully. She drank in small, careful sips, watching him the entire time. He didn't move. He didn't grab. He didn't demand anything in return. For the first time, she truly wondered if everything she had been told was wrong. She lowered the canteen slowly, her glowing eyes locked on his. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that carried no words but said enough. It's all right. She clutched the canteen to her chest for a moment, then placed it on the ground between them, not rejecting it, but not claiming it either. A fragile trust, like a thin branch across a river. The fire cracked softly. He leaned forward and began pulling a few supplies from his pack, small bandages, a strip of cloth, and a small medical pouch he carried for injuries on long hunts. She stiffened as he stood and walked toward her, but he didn't rush. His footsteps were quiet, deliberate. When he knelt in front of her, their eyes met again. Her breathing quickened, and her hand instinctively moved to cover the wounds on her wrist. He raised his hands slowly, showing the bandages, then tapped the wound gently in the air, miming what he wanted to do. She didn't understand his language, but she understood his eyes. He wasn't trying to harm her. Still trembling, she let him get closer. His hands were warm and rough, scarred from years of living on the edge of civilization. He gently wrapped the bandage around the glowing cut on her wrist. The light dimmed under the cloth, leaving only the faint shimmer of her skin. She watched him the whole time, expecting a trick, a sudden twist of cruelty. It never came. His touch was steady and careful, not the grip of a hunter, but the hands of someone trying not to break something delicate. She had never seen a human up close like this before. Not the face of a soldier, not the roar of engines, not the fire of warships. Just a man, tired and bruised, sitting in a forest with a stranger who was supposed to hate him. Her voice was soft when it came, fragile like the mist. She said something in her own language, a single line that he didn't understand. Her lips trembled as she spoke it, as if it wasn't meant to be said aloud. But her tone wasn't full of fear this time. It was something else. He didn't need to know the words to hear the question hidden inside. Why? Why are you helping me? He stared at her for a moment, then lowered his gaze. He couldn't answer her in words. His language wouldn't reach her. So instead, he just shrugged lightly, a small human gesture that carried quiet meaning. Because he could. Because leaving her to die wasn't who he was. Because, despite everything this galaxy had become, not every human believed in the stories she had been told. She stared at him for a long time after that, as if trying to peel apart the truth behind his simple gesture. The forest around them whispered softly, the firelight flickered across their faces, and something small but important changed in the way she looked at him. Her shoulders relaxed, just a little. Her breathing steadied. The way she held herself shifted from a cornered creature to someone learning, slowly, that maybe the world wasn't as simple as she had been told. Then, as the night deepened, she pointed toward the sky again. But this time she didn't just point. She spoke slowly, carefully, saying the name of each star in her language. He didn't understand the words, but the sound was soft, almost like music. She was sharing something. Her people's stories, their sky, their world. And when she finished, she pointed to him, then to the stars, asking with her eyes for him to share his. He followed her gaze upward and began to speak in a low voice, naming the stars as his people knew them. She couldn't understand, but she listened anyway. And that was enough. The gulf between their worlds didn't disappear in that moment, but it shifted. It became a bridge made of firelight, bandages, shared water, and stories told under the same stars. She leaned a little closer to the fire, the warmth softening her stiff posture. He rested against the log behind him, exhaustion pulling at his body but his guard still half up. They were two souls from opposite sides of a long war, but in this clearing, surrounded by mist and silence, they weren't enemies. They were just human and alien, tired, breathing, alive. Somewhere far above them, starships belonging to both their peoples waited in orbit, fleets trained to kill on sight. The Galactic Council would never understand this moment. It was small, fragile, and quiet. But it was real. She no longer looked at him with the eyes of prey fearing a predator. She looked at him like someone who had seen a truth hidden beneath all the hate. He was not what she thought he was. And she was no longer just the frightened creature he'd found in a trap. The night wrapped around them gently, and for the first time, they shared it not as enemies, but as something far more complicated. And far more powerful. The night stretched on endlessly, a river of silence broken only by the soft hiss of the dying fire and the distant cry of creatures far out in the dark. The alien girl lay wrapped in his jacket, her breathing steady but her eyes still open, their silver-blue glow faint in the shadows. The human sat beside the fire, staring into the glowing embers, his mind turning through everything that had happened. He hadn't planned for any of this. When he had set that trap, he expected a beast, not someone with a heartbeat and fear in her eyes. He expected blood, not trust. And yet, here she was, sleeping at the edge of his camp, a living reminder of how small and strange the galaxy could become in the space of a single night. Above them, the stars glimmered through breaks in the canopy, a quiet witness to the fragile bond forming beneath. Humanity and her kind had not shared peaceful nights like this for as long as anyone could remember. War had burned through their history like fire through dry fields. Fleets had clashed in orbit, colonies destroyed, treaties broken before they were even signed. Her people saw humans as monsters in armor. His people saw hers as enemies in the shadows. But in the forest, with no fleets, no armies, and no council, those old stories didn't matter. There was only survival, and the strange pull between two people who should have been enemies. He stood quietly, brushing the dirt from his hands, and walked a little away from the camp to check the perimeter. His boots sank into the wet soil with each careful step. He scanned the trees with the practiced ease of someone who had spent too many nights on the edge of nowhere. Every movement was quiet, controlled. He was a hunter, but tonight, he was also a guardian. When he turned back, she was sitting upright again, hugging his jacket tightly, her eyes following him nervously through the firelight. Even now, even after everything, she didn't fully trust him. But she didn't run either. That alone said something. He walked back slowly, lowering his weapon as he sat down again. She didn't look away from him this time. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but the language between them was a wall. Still, walls can be crossed in other ways. He held out a small piece of ration bar toward her. She stared at it, blinking like she wasn't sure whether it was food or a trick. He broke off a piece himself, chewed it slowly, and then offered the rest again. After a long silence, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed against his, light and cold. She took a cautious bite. Her face didn't change much, but she didn't spit it out. That was enough for him to exhale, just a little. The fire cracked as if reminding them it was still there. She pointed up at the stars again, her soft voice flowing in her own language, naming constellations with a quiet strength. Her world was out there, somewhere in that black ocean. A home she thought she'd never see again. A people who would never believe a human had saved her life. He followed her gaze. Somewhere up there was his home too, a small blue world surrounded by fleets, iron, and war. They were both pieces of something much bigger. But down here, away from the noise of their civilizations, none of that mattered. She then surprised him. She placed her hand over her chest, said a word slowly, then pointed to herself. He realized what she was doing. A name. Her name. She repeated it once more, softly. He stared at her for a second, then placed a hand over his chest and said his own name. It wasn't perfect. She struggled to pronounce it, the syllables catching in her throat, but she tried. He tried her name too, stumbling over the strange sounds, but when she laughed softly, a small, broken sound like something unused to joy, it cracked through the cold air like sunlight through fog. That moment, small and quiet, became something neither of them would forget. The forest groaned faintly as the night grew colder. She shivered, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. Without a word, he reached for another blanket from his pack and tossed it gently toward her. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before wrapping it around her shoulders. Her breathing slowed, the lines of fear in her face softening as the warmth surrounded her. He leaned back against the log, exhaustion creeping into his bones. But he didn't close his eyes fully. The forest wasn't safe. But he felt something different now, something he hadn't felt in a long time out here on the edge. He wasn't alone. A soft sound broke the silence, not from the forest, but from her. She was humming. A low, strange melody, not quite like any human song, but soft enough to make the night feel less cruel. She wasn't singing for him. She was singing to herself, to the stars, to the memory of a world she had lost. But as the sound wrapped around the firelight, something in his chest tightened. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something human. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere far beyond the treetops, starships and war still defined their worlds. Councils still whispered about enemies. But none of that reached them here. It was just the fire, the hum of her voice, and two beings who had learned, slowly and painfully, that the stories they had been told might not be the whole truth. When dawn finally crept through the forest, pale and cold, the mist rose in thin ribbons. She didn't run when the sun touched her face. She didn't look at him with the same terrified eyes as before. Instead, she rose quietly, walked to his side, and stood beside him without needing to say a single word. The forest hadn't changed, but they had. She was no longer the terrified creature in the net, and he was no longer just the human with a weapon. They were something else now, a fragile connection born in the middle of nowhere. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, and she fell into step beside him. They walked through the mist as the forest slowly woke around them. The future was uncertain. The galaxy beyond would not understand this. But they did. And sometimes, that was enough. Far above, the stars burned silently, as if watching two small figures below who had decided, for one night, to rewrite a story that had been told for generations. And as their footsteps disappeared into the forest, the trap that had once caught a frightened girl had become something far more dangerous than either of them had expected, a spark. A spark that could change everything. If you enjoyed this HFY sci-fi story about humanity, aliens, and unexpected bonds formed in the shadows of war, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more tales among the stars. Your support helps keep these stories alive.